Hi, this is my issue 13. Should we require labeling of genetically modified food? So, my first few points for yes is that over 70% of processed foods contain genetically engineered ingredients. So, that's over half of the ingredients of processed foods that have been genetically modified. Um, I think that's a large amount, and I think people should know if they're eating genetically modified foods or not. So 64 other nations, including Europe, Russia, and China, they all require GE labeling already. They're already ahead of the United States in that they require to know what's in their food. There are no required testing for health risks related to genetically engineered crops. So we don't know the long-term effects of these genetically engineered ingredients. And I think that's another reason why people have the right to know what's in their food. Um, the only testing that has proved genetically engineered foods to be substantially equivalent comes from the chemical companies that hold the patent on these genetically engineered foods. So the people who created these chemicals are the ones saying they're safe, pretty much. They're the only ones that done any testing that are proving their safety. Now, putting a label on these foods are not saying that GE foods are dangerous. That's not what they're saying at all. It's necessarily just saying that whatever has happened to these foods, genetically engineered, has changed it physically, and that's material that is to be known to consumers. It's something that we have a right to know as consumers if something has been added to our food that physically changes it. The current guidelines right now have been in effect for over 20 years. So the non-requirement of labeling GE foods or ingredients, that's been in place for over 20 years. And it was picked up by the President's Council on Competitiveness in 1992. So it wasn't brought on by a scientist. It wasn't brought on by a healthcare advocate. It was just a guideline brought in saying you could or couldn't put it on there. It's not a requirement at all. And like I said, a lot of things have happened in the last 20 years. I think that that's something that should have been looked over again and further tested as well as labeled. So without labeling, consumers are kind of in the dark. Like if you're eating genetically engineered foods and there's no label, you have no idea what you're eating. You don't know that you're putting these genetically engineered ingredients into your body. And some people that doesn't sit right with. Some people, they just want to know what is in their food. Now for no, labeling the genetically modified ingredients could cause unnecessary concern among public. These labels do not mean that it's dangerous. It doesn't mean that anything's wrong with the food. It doesn't mean that something bad could happen if you eat it. It just means that there's genetically engineered ingredients in the food. It just means that something has changed your food, and we want you to be aware of it. So I think the opposing people to this are afraid that it's going to scare people away from their food products. All plants, even if they're not genetically modified, they are covered in bacteria and viruses and other living organisms and their DNAs. So the genetically modified foods really are no different than that, except that us humans modified them instead of Mother Nature. So there are technological advances that make it possible to produce cheaper food, greater quantities, in a more sustainable fashion, because of the genetically modified ingredients. I think it's been a great thing for the food industry. It allows them, like it said, to make this food cheaper and to make it in bigger amounts and make it in a more environmentally friendly fashion than a regular food product. However, labels for GMO food imply that there's something wrong when there isn't, and misleading information that is being brought on by these GMO labels is actually thought to come from the people who are pushing this initiative. Their beliefs, their preferences, that they don't want GMO foods, they are putting it out there with a label as a bad thing. They are trying to push it as a bad thing, and they're trying to force their preferences on the public through pushing these labels through. So all of these things are a reason why we shouldn't put labels. But in my personal opinion, I believe that we should have the GMO labels on foods. I believe as a consumer, you have the right to know what's in your food, and whether that scares you or not or deters you away from that product is your own decision. I don't think you should let other companies or political figures or a label scare you from any product. I think you should do your own research, find out what's in your food, and eat it if you want. But I also think that they should have that choice. They should have the knowledge of what's in their food to make their own choice. So that's how I feel about issue 13. Should we require labeling for genetically engineered foods?